Okay, we had a little bit of technical issues starting a little bit late. And this week, on the most significant research and news, is we're going to be going over, and this is going to be part one on hypothyroidism. It's primarily going to be the cause. We do this every Thursday at 12 noon, and we're also on every single Saturday at 9 a.m. to 10 a.m. with a simultaneous broadcast with KDKA. So we're going to go through some of the information about the thyroid. And when we do this, one of the things that I want to go through is, what does the thyroid actually do? And when we take a look at as far as what does it do, how does it work, what's its function, first of all, it is an endocrine organ. And its job is to produce, store, and release hormones that affect or at least help regulate metabolism. So it's this neuroendocrine, it's part of the neuroendocrine system, which is the nerve system and the hormonal system. And it really has an effect on every single cell in the body. And the neuroendocrine system controls everything. So it's your energy control centers. It's primarily, when we take a look at the thyroid, it's going from the hypothalamus, signals go from the hypothalamus, they release thyroid releasing hormone. That goes to the pituitary. The pituitary then releases thyroid stimulating hormone, TSH. That goes to the thyroid in this case. And then the thyroid releases primarily T4. And we're going to go through that. It's not, I'm going to go through some of these other things a little bit later. But one of the things in Chinese medicine, I talk about the jing, or it's really your mojo. If you don't have your mojo, that's one of the things that happens. But many think that metabolism is only about the thyroid. But and let me just tell you about that. There are so many other organs involved, not just the thyroid. And when I talk about that, just see if we can get our studio working here properly. There's a lot more involved. And one of the things is that you have the liver involved. A lot of people don't realize how involved the liver is, because the liver is actually more involved in delivering energy to all of your cells, particularly between meals. And we talk about the fact that you have other organs involved, like the pancreas. The pancreas is involved because it produces glucagon. It produces insulin. And the glucagon helps release the fuel, this energy in your body for fuel. Your insulin allows that energy in the form of glucose to enter into the cell. And so it has to be used inside the cell. Then your thyroid, that basically turns the metabolism up and turns it down. It's sort of, a lot of times it's been referred to as the gas pedal of the body as far as how that metabolism works. And then, of course, you have the adrenal glands. That has energy. That has to do with your energy production as well. It primarily does three things. That's fluid balance. Fluid balance is primarily used by the hormone aldosterone. It helps regulate or eliminate inflammation. That's primarily the corticosteroids. And then, of course, to be able to keep the brain attentive. And that's where the epinephrine, adrenaline, norepinephrine, these things that what we talk about is, and so these are very, very closely related. The adrenals and thyroid are very, very closely related. It's by the hypothalamus to the pituitary, and whether the pituitary both to the adrenals and to the thyroid. And when the adrenals are exhausted, they actually downregulate the thyroid, which we'll get into that as well. And so then you have leptin. And leptin's job is to control, manage, and direct energy. It's sort of like the accountant of the body. And when you're leptin sensitive, basically it's very easy to utilize all of your calories. But when you're leptin resistant, now you have all kinds of issues. Now that's when you see that those excess calories are basically stored as fat. So when we go through some of this, and let's just take a look at some of this information with the thyroid. First of all, an estimated 20 million Americans have some form of thyroid disease. 1 in 8 women will develop thyroid disorders during their lifetime. The number of people suffering from thyroid disorders just continues to rise, and it really is rising dramatically. And that's one of the reasons why I want to talk about what's causing this, what interrupts the thyroid, what causes this dysfunction, because 60% of the people that have it are completely unaware of their condition. So one of the first things that, and I should have put a slide on this, which I don't believe that I did, and that is what are some of the symptoms. So let me just try to give you sort of a list of some of the symptoms that there are. Number one of the things you notice is you lose the outer 1/3 of the eyebrows tend to get very sparse. Your hair gets thinner. It's you can get puffiness in the face, especially around the eyes. You get that puffiness. There tends to be an increased sensitivity to heat. Some people, though, experience a sensitivity to cold. Typically, though, when it's a sensitivity to cold, that's more the adrenals, and they're very closely interrelated. And that's going to be one of the other parts of this, the differentiation between the adrenal insufficiency and hypothyroid dysfunction or thyroid dysfunction. And the other thing is the nails can get thicker. They don't have to. Tend to have unexplained weight gain. People who are hypothyroid tend to have more weight gain. By the way, anyone who's had, if you have a high incidence of miscarriages, there's a really, really good chance that you have hypothyroid, and that should be looked at. It can cause hoarseness in your voice, muscle weakness. Now, here's something that a lot of people don't associate with, but elevated cholesterol. And I've talked about this before, because one of the things when you have, it can cause elevated cholesterol. It can also cause lower HDL cholesterol. You know, we talk about the good cholesterol and the bad cholesterol, and one of the reasons is because it's really the cholesterol that turns into these various hormones. So a lot of hormones, hormonal imbalance is because of the thyroid. One of the reasons is because the cholesterol, in order for the conversion to occur, and that conversion, you know, cholesterol turns to vitamin D3, it turns to pregnenolone, DHEA. DHEA then turns to like the estrogens. It turns to even the HDL cholesterol. This requires T3, which is which is a thyroid hormone. I don't want to get into too much. I start to have to watch myself when I get into this. But triiodotyrosine versus T4 versus T3, but it requires T3 and vitamin A for that conversion. So that can happen. By the way, you can get people that have hypothyroid tend to have heavier or irregular menstrual periods. They have a slower heart rate. They tend to have higher incidence of depression. They have impaired memory. There's basal body temperature, which we will get into, is very much involved. And one of the things is that that's one of the best ways to determine if you are hypothyroid. And it'll cause your basal body temperature to be low but steady. Whereas when you have adrenal insufficiency, it can cause it to be low, but it fluctuates a lot. So let's get into some of the things that can affect the thyroid. And by the way, I'm going to go into, here's just, we're going to tell you some things regarding the thyroid that you've probably never heard of. There's so many things affect it, but a 2007 study found that among people with a history of autoimmune hypothyroidism, by the way, about 90% of hypothyroid is autoimmune, that 54% had a positive breath test for SIBO, which is small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, compared to only 5% in the control. And we don't really know if that's the cause or if it's just causal. You know, in other words, did the hypothyroid cause SIBO, or does SIBO have an effect causing hypothyroid somehow with the microbiome of the intestinal tract? Now, since thyroid hormones help stimulate gut motility, it's also possible that low motility and constipation provide an environment for small intestines that's conducive to bacterial growth. By the way, I didn't mention that as one of the things for hypothyroid symptoms is constipation. I was remiss in that as I was going through the list. Okay, so here's some of the things the thyroid can be affected by. And one of the big things is acute, immediate, stressful situations. And that initiates that fight or flight response, causing the thyroid to increase glucose breakdown. It's chronic stress. The thyroid is continually overstimulated and eventually basically becomes depleted. Thyroid can be disrupted due to excess of estrogen, which can be prevented by adequate progesterone levels. It can be disrupted by xenoestrogens. Xenoestrogens can be found in so many products, particularly the makeups, all these types of cosmetics. And xeno means outside or foreign. They're foreign estrogens or estrogen mimicking products. And what they do is there are different chemicals that can disrupt the thyroid. Your organophosphates can, heavy metals can. It can be disrupted due to other chemicals, including glyphosates. Glyphosates are, that's Roundup. So they use it a ton today with products like corn, soybean, almost all corn uses Roundup. The phthalates are basically that's what allows your plastics to be flexible. So it's found in a lot of plastics. There's nearly always an autoimmune component to that. We'll get into that in a little bit. There's non-native EMFs affect the thyroid. And this is probably one of the biggest things, including mobile phones, Wi-Fi. I can even tell you that some of these smart devices, and I've seen that a lot. And let me see if I can, let me just try to go to a, I have this, some information on this on one of these. Let's just see if we can get this done. Let's see if we can bring up the computer and show some of this stuff here. Here it is here. Let's see if we can get to that. This is alterations in TSH and thyroid hormones following mobile phone use. By the way, let me just go through some of this and we'll go back and we'll go into, you can see some of these are, this is the Journal of Clinical Endocrinology and Metabolism, the effects of seasonal changes on transition between subclinical hypothyroid and euthyroid status. Let me explain what this is. What they found was that people who are exposed to cold temperatures for long periods of time can develop hypothyroidism. And that's a whole other thing. Some people believe that we know that in hibernating animals that they become hypothyroid, it's interesting because the body goes through some different changes. And this is pretty interesting itself because, we tend to think, well, in the wintertime, they'll explain, in the wintertime our metabolism slows. But there's something else that happens in the wintertime that people don't think of. And what happens is that in the wintertime, it not only slows, but we tend to have, just like animals hibernate, they're using different systems, different pathways. And we talk about the AMP, activated protein kinase pathway, and whether it's going to go through lipid metabolism or glucose metabolism, or are you going into fat burning or sugar burning. During the winter, we tend to, like other animals that hibernate, they go into lipid metabolism. So you actually, they tend to slow the mechanism down. They slow their system down. They do go into a hypothyroid state because they're trying to go through this period. However, although they're slowing the metabolism, they're getting most of their energy from fats. So you can actually get into a fat-burning state, and it's been shown. And it's one of the things, even during our weight loss program, one of the things that we see is during the wintertime, if you do the program, you actually do really well. And by the way, because of the fact that you are, you can actually get into, you have to watch when you eat these sweets and stuff, you go into a lot more, you can actually change this and really put on weight. So during the winter, you always hear it, eat more hearty meals. Take a look at what we have available to us. In the summertime, your body can deal with the higher sugar content of fruit, vegetables. In the wintertime, you're better off with the proteins. And what do we see? During the wintertime, it's harder to find good fruits and stuff. Today with the shipping in the world, But if you're just local, and it's really best to try to eat local. But that's a very interesting thing that I did want to bring up on that. So, but I thought that was interesting. Here's a journal. This is Science Direct. This was Environmental International. Phthalates and thyroid function, preschool age children, and they just go through some of the information with that. This is here we have, which one is this here? This is Clinical and Translational Endocrinology from around the globe. Prevalence of thyroid autoimmunity and dysfunction in women with iron deficiency during early pregnancy. Is it altered? Yes, indeed, it's altered. One of the things is you have to realize that in order to make tyrosine, in order to make T4, you will need, and there's phenylalanine, and you're going to have to have iron within that. Okay, so we're going to go into that a little bit more because I didn't want to get into some of these things quite yet. Let's see what else I have up here. Thyroid dysfunction, reproductive health, thyroid status, quality of life, and mental health in patients on hemodialysis. And I will get into this a little bit more, but basically, we'll take a look at some of this. And one of the things, like even this one here, which one was it here when we talk about this iron deficiency? One of the things, they found that in this study, there's about a third of pregnant women are iron deficient. And because they're iron deficient, they risk going hypothyroid, and when you're hypothyroid, you risk miscarriages. So this was a pretty big thing. This was an interesting one. It's that headaches are a major risk factor for the development of hypothyroidism. And one of the things about this one was that that the people who had pre-existing headaches had, I believe it's over a 20% increased risk of developing hypothyroidism. And people that have migraines show an increased risk of 41%, which is really just a huge amount on that. And then we have this is from Lancet, Diabetes and Endocrinology, Association between borderline neonatal thyroid stimulating hormone concentrations and educational developmental outcomes. And again, when you start to look at this, is what they found was that you have the people who had out of range thyroid have a poor neurodevelopmental outcomes. In other words, they're not as intelligent. They don't have some other challenges. We see that the thyroid is so related to so many different things. Thyroid dysfunction can double the risk of heart conditions, even mild thyroid dysfunction in pregnancy, like I said, can really lead to some really serious effects, and it can affect your quality of daily life. So these are the things that we talk about and what we have to become aware of. And one of the things we see is, I think there's one, here it is here, that fluoride levels in drinking water are associated with hypothyroidism prevalence in England. And that's because it competes with the halides. So you have fluoride and bromide are definitely going to compete with that. And then what's the last one that we put up here? Oh, this was the mobile phone use. So these are the things that we know of. These are things that are absolutely going to cause of. And that is, we talk about these disruptions, disrupted by the halides, such as the fluorides and the bromides, imbalances from other systems. And, we talk about this, that the hypothalamus controls it, the adrenals, the ovaries or the testes. Like I said, prolonged cold exposure can. Iron deficiency affects the thyroid. You can also have a physical compression. The scalene muscles in the neck can actually put pressure on the thyroid and actually affect it. And we see that when somebody has an anterior head translation. And so we talk about an anterior head translation. That's not as much of a common, but it definitely can do it. But there's so many other factors. We'll go real quick into this. Increased calcium decreases the transport of thyroid hormones across the cell membrane. Decreased potassium impairs the hormone at the cell itself. You have vitamin A, B, and C are needed. You have iodine is definitely needed. It's a major factor. That the manganese, potassium, zinc, selenium, copper, they all affect the thyroid. Manganese permits the synthesis of thyroid hormones. Copper reduces potassium and decreases thyroid activity. Zinc enhances potassium and increases thyroid activity. We know that potassium sensitizes the cells. I thought we were streaming and we're not, I guess. Hold on, I'm thinking I'm getting messages that were... Let's see. We'll find out. But this is, if not, we're going to have to start this all over again. Increased magnesium and calcium reduce thyroid activity. Inflammation suppresses D1 and increases D3. I'm going to get into this later. This is deiodinase enzyme type 1 and deiodinase enzyme type 3. This is getting much more involved, and you don't have to really know about this. So I am hoping that we are streaming. So I will see if we are. I'm getting messages, though, that we aren't. The hypothalamus, the pituitary, the ovaries, the thyroid, they're all in control of this. And that's what we call it, the hypothalamic pituitary ovarian adrenal thyroid axis. But the thing is, it's not as simple as just stating that it's your thyroid. And I don't, here's the thing. The thyroid influences the production of all kinds of hormones, including the sex hormone binding globulin, prolactin, gonadotropin releasing hormone. They all affect the menstrual cycle. They all affect your ability to get pregnant. And so that's one of the reasons I said when we started this program, I said if you've had a history of miscarriages, you need to look at the thyroid. And it's so closely related to the adrenals, because when they're exhausted, what that does is they downregulate metabolic activity. In other words, that downregulation, it's going to decrease T3 and T4. It's going to increase the thyroid binding globulin. In other words, you're going to get less thyroxine to the cell. And if you have less thyroxine to the cell, that is a form of hypothyroid. But here's the thing about this, that so many times when people have adrenal exhaustion, their free T3 and free T4 are going to be low, while they'll see the total T3 and total T4 may be normal. And you see TSH can actually be normal, or it can even be a little bit high, indicating if TSH is high, that it means that you have, that's looking at hypothyroidism. So here's what happens. So the doctors see TSH is going high, and you're exhausted. They think, you know what, let's add some thyroxine, or levothyroxine, which is, it may be Synthroid, it could be Armour-thyroid, whatever it is, even the natural ones. You start to add this when you didn't address that the problem was the adrenals. And what happens is that is the worst thing that you can do, because when the adrenals are exhausted, they're telling the body to, hey, you need to slow down. So they're telling the thyroid to slow down, and now the thyroid medications are telling it to speed up. And what happens is, every once in a while, you can have a little bit of improvement on energy at first, and then it just breaks down completely. And so you improve the blood work. You may have some improvement of symptoms, but then here's what happens. The more medication you have, you're taking this medication, but you're still having hypothyroid symptoms. You still have low temperature. You start to now get heart palpitations. You can get tremors. You can get fatigue. And the reason is you get a condition that we call wired and tired. And these are people that they can't sleep at night. I mean, they're literally challenges. And I'm going to get into the difference in that in a later as to what is the difference between the adrenals and how do you know that? Because 70% of people that are on thyroid medications, they continue to complain of hypothyroid symptoms because they're not getting to the cause of the cause. And a lot of times it's because of the adrenals are involved, or the ovaries are involved, or these sex organs are involved. When you support the adrenals, then the thyroid will often just disappear, but you can still have the blood work may look bad for months. In fact, there's one condition that the blood work can look like it's horrific. It gets like way worse. Your TSH just skyrockets. And in that condition, and that's there's reasons for all of that. There's reasons for all of that. But you can't be blinded by just looking at the blood work. You have to look at what's really the issue. So when both the adrenals and the thyroid weak, as I said, happens way too often, it creates a vicious cycle. And the result of that is that the patient spirals downward. So if they get more tired and sluggish, they keep eating more meds, super tired, but they can't sleep. They're gaining weight or they can't lose weight. Sometimes it's just, or you have the basal temperature is remaining low. And you're putting on the thyroid meds, and the doctors become baffled by the response of the thyroid. And they're like, it's just not reacting the way that it should. And either, and sometimes, as they're putting up the meds, the TSH goes down. In other words, it becomes normal. And they'll say, oh, everything's fine. And it's just crazy. So there's all kinds of things. So you have to understand how the thyroid works, what the function is, and how everything is so interrelated. And most NutriMost intelligence helps the practitioner really unravel those interconnections, along with the practitioner focusing on, let's take a look at basal body temperature. And remember how you do basal body temperature. And then look at the end result signs and the end result symptoms. And to do basal